Welcome to the Inner Alignment Podcast, a neuroscience approach to healing anxiety and depression caused by childhood trauma stored in the body. With the right tools, healing long-term anxiety and depression is completely possible when you heal at root cause. Join me as we expand boundaries in the field of trauma recovery with the revolutionary Inner Alignment System, a 6-layered approach to addressing stored trauma in every layer of the body. Welcome to the Inner Alignment for Childhood Trauma podcast. I'm your host, Kim Beekman. I'm so excited to be with you today and to be talking about trauma packets and to go into these concepts of soul retrieval and the Inner Alignment soul retrieval process. To discuss soul retrieval, we need to dive into really exploring what is a trauma packet, how is trauma stored in the body, how do we hold childhood trauma, how does it show up in the present moment. So we're really excited to dig into that with you today. I have the privilege of welcoming back Daniela Hess. Daniela, welcome. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I love inner alignment work, and so this is just gold.
Yeah, thank you, Daniela. And we're also joined today by Laura, Killian, and Misty Lamppa. Both Laura and Misty are inner alignment practitioners. Laura is a soul retrieval healer. She's the co-founder of this soul retrieval process. She's helped me delineate it. She's helped me to measure it. She's helped me to train people. She's really key in helping us train our advanced practitioners and soul retrieval healers. This system wouldn't be what it is today without Laura. She lives on a farm in upstate New York with her family, and she is all heart and shows up with such compassion and grace in her work. I'm just so grateful, Laura, to have worked together for 7 years. Welcome.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you. It's great to be here with all of you. I'm so passionate about this work, so I'm happy to be here and honored to be able to share and talk about my experiences with the work. Just grateful for your wisdom, Kim, and the whole system and all the people and participants that have been a part of it. So
great. And so we have Misty here. Misty's a yoga teacher trainer. She's an advanced inner alignment practitioner, soul retrieval healer. She does a lot of work with inner alignment through her yoga teacher trainings. And she works with our inner alignment healing clients. She helps us in our inner alignment practitioner training. She lives in Minnesota with her 4 kids and spends lots of time teaching and time outdoors and traveling. Misty's just a powerhouse of wisdom, skill, and spiritual connection. Such an honor to work alongside her gifted presence. Thanks for joining, Misty.
It's such a full circle moment to be here. Daniela was the person who didn't even know that she introduced me to Kim. And so through my 500-hour yoga training, I was introduced to Kim in inner alignment. And Laura was my main healer. So it's just a beautiful full circle moment. I'm so passionate about this work. It's a life calling, I feel, and I'm really grateful to be here for the conversation about it.
Yeah. Thank you, Misty. Thank you for being so integral and bringing it out into the world as well. Yeah, so we have so much to talk about. And just to put this into context, we are going to dive into one of the 3 pillars, hopefully at some point to this podcast or the next episode. And we're going to be looking at the first pillar, which is the soul retrieval process. Which is a really intensive process that heals stored trauma in the body. So anxiety and depression in our language or our modality is an effect of childhood trauma stored deep within the body. The experience in childhood happens, and then it will reverberate into the present moment and seep into or overlay into our present moments. And so the soul retrieval process helps to get to the root or the core of childhood trauma experience and really change the somatic experience of that body memory. The body keeps the score, and if we can get into the body to change the experience of trauma in the body, it really changes our experience and relieves the effects of the trauma in the present moment.
So Kim, thank you for those that are just joining us here in this second episode. In the first episode, we really broke down all three pillars of the inner alignment process. So can you take a walk down memory lane about the three pillars before we dive into trauma packets and soul retrieval?
Yeah, perfect. So, so with childhood trauma stored in the body, we want to get into the body and relieve the feeling or the sensation and the experience in the trauma packets. We do that through the soul retrieval process. It's the main process that allows us to get into the body and change the root cause. And what we realized through trial and error, and that's a whole other episode of how this process was created, but through this soul retrieval process, once the experience is healed within the body, we then have to rewire every layer of ourselves systematically over 2 months to get that healing to stick, essentially, to condition our thoughts to the new experience, to condition our feelings, to condition the way we move through life. And this, Joe Dispenza has given us so much data on how it's important to recreate the habit of being ourselves. We essentially need to create new thought habits and patterns, new emotional habits and patterns, new breathing, moving, how we move through the day, how we relate to our friends, our spouses, our work environment. And that's what we call the rewiring practice. That has to happen through 2 months repetitively so we can neurosynaptically wire in a new way of being in our lives. And so that process of the rewiring is a critical way to hold the soul retrieval and to sustain it after someone graduates. And then the last piece, or the most important piece that bleeds in, is really creating love as the basis of the work. And that sounds very fuzzy and hooky spooky in a way, like, what do you mean love? But it's really holding the fifth dimensional heart space, that consciousness of divine love, and being the vessel of love, and teaching our clients how to live in that space of safety and connection and worthiness, and like they matter and like they feel good. And that's going to look and feel different for everybody, but it is a pillar of our work, because unless that deliciousness seeps in to their lives, they're still going to feel like they're in a trauma response. And so that's kind of the aloe that seeps into the wound over those 2 months of deep work.
I'd love to hear from all of you about what is trauma. This is a very trauma-informed society now. We're moving in that direction, and it's a word, it's a term that's used so often. It would be really great to understand through your lenses and experiences, what is trauma? Like, how does somebody know they have trauma? Is there anyone that is exempt from having trauma? So let's start there.
I don't feel that anybody is exempt from trauma. I don't feel that as a mother, I have not created trauma in my own children, to be frank. It is the smallest trauma to the biggest trauma. It all affects us differently, and it all affects us from the age of 25, 24 and younger, when we don't have that full rational mind development. It is stored in our body, and we are seeing scientific proof written about that stored trauma in the body. And big T trauma could be, sexual abuse, physical abuse. There are big traumas where people were uprooted from their lives or had devastation. And then there's little trauma where somebody got bullied on the playground, where somebody got up in front of an audience at a band performance and they forgot their notes. It is still traumatized, and it's still absorbed in the body. It feels vulnerable and unsafe and not good enough. I don't belong. A little kid in a card store who gets lost and thinks they're unsafe and they're going to die. Dad's looking all over, but to that child in that moment, it's a trauma stored in the body.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it gets formed in our bodies. So like as children, I don't know if you've for myself, I've had children and I've watched them. Like, do you ever take a kid camping, like a toddler camping, and they're like putting sticks in their mouths and throwing rocks against the car, right? Like, so kids experience life through their bodies. That's how they learn. And while they're doing that, they're like building neurosynaptic circuitry within their brain and neurochemistry, and it's how the brain forms and how the body really experiences life. And so they live through the body, they experience and learn through the body. They don't have a developed prefrontal cortex to filter out the world or to be able to process what's happening. And that's why they need parents to keep them safe and protected and to care for them, right? Because they might just walk out in the middle of the street because they don't have a fully developed brain that says, oh, I shouldn't do that. That's not safe. And so that same way that children learn is how trauma can get trapped in the body and how the neurocircuitry can be built around those trauma experiences. So just as they feel a rock or they feel a hot stove and they're like, ooh, hot, pull my hand away, right? That experience of dad yelling at the very first moment at 5 years old can be an experience that goes straight into the body. And because this happens without us even knowing it, as parents, we're like, we don't know what's impacting the child, but trauma would be an experience like that overwhelms the nervous system, that overwhelms their understanding, their thoughts in the moment. It overwhelms them emotionally. They feel fear, they feel scared, they feel unsafe or disconnected or unworthy or unloved or like they didn't matter in the moment. So any of those experiences that happen and overwhelm a child's system has the potential to be stored as trauma in the body.
Yeah, and if I can even add to that too, right? As parents, we're just finding our way through. And so there's so many things that we don't know, like you said, that we're doing that are creating trauma in our children's bodies. I said to somebody last night, I said, no, everybody has childhood trauma. You don't think your kids have childhood trauma? They do. And it's not your fault. You're doing the best you can. If you're a conscious parent or even unconsciously, you're doing the best you can. But seemingly benign things are still stored in the body in those trauma packets. It's inescapable. And it can really inform in negative ways how we move through our life, but it can also inform in positive ways too. So it is really interesting to see that it can inform both of those things.
Right. Like you walk into grandma's house and you smell apple pie and you get a big squishy hug. Like that is an experience that can be stored in the body as love. And that gets just wired up. And every time you smell apple pie, you might feel this warmth of grandma, and that can get auto-associated, right? So we have these lots of experiences stored in the body. And the ones that we're naming as childhood trauma are the ones that have fear bundled in. And I think one of the most important aspects of how trauma gets stored is typically something will get stored as trauma if there was not an adult to help process the experience at the time or close to the time that it happened. So the clinical definition is an experience that overwhelms the system where there wasn't an adult present to help the child process through. Remember, they don't have a developed prefrontal cortex, so they're not able to be like, oh, dad yelled because he had a bad day and, he saw the whole house was destroyed and he got really scared at that moment because he didn't think there was enough time to clean up, right? Like an explanation or an understanding or an ability to be like, oh, that's dad and he's angry and I'm safe and I'm okay right now. So that's what we mean by having that experience of the adult present to help process. And, Laura and I had the real sacred experience of working with two 40-year-old twins who had both experienced a trauma in childhood, the same trauma. Because they were two twin girls, they both received the information at the same time. They were kind of were handled as if they were a group of people. So they had a lot of the same memories and experiences. And what was fascinating in that experience was that each of the two women stored the trauma of finding out of their father's death. They stored the experience very differently. And that was fascinating to me, because up until that point, I would have assumed it would be kind of similarly stored and show up in the present moment, reverberating into their 40-year-old present moments in a very similar way. But that wasn't the case at all. And I found that to be fascinating. And that goes to the karmic or energetic environment that a trauma lands into within the person's body.
And even the qualities in the present moment that they were playing out, that they had wired in as a result of the trauma, was completely different. The way that they went through life, the relationships, everyday functioning was completely different, which was wild to me, that two twins associated so close, really close twins, love for each other, had experienced it differently in their body and had really wired in differently and brought that into the present moment.
Right. So they were 10 or 11 years old, and their father had tragically died, and they were both in the same place when they heard of the experience. But one of them internalized the experience. Her trauma really was stored in the root of her body and affected her sense of safety. And it showed up as chronic anxiety in her life. And so the way that she experienced it or processed it, she didn't feel like her her mom had really helped her integrate the experience. She felt unsafe. She didn't feel cared for. So she really felt like she didn't have the safety in that moment. When that happened, it was almost like the cork came out of her root, and she was kind of almost outside of her body from that point on, in this really untethered state. So twin A experienced it as feeling unrooted, unsafe, and really wound up having chronic anxiety for the 30 years that followed. And then twin B didn't experience the distance from mom. She felt like mom helped her process the experience. And her experience was more in the will chakra, in the space of feeling angry and entitled for people to really show up for her in a way. And she felt abandoned, but also just really pissed in life. And so the way that the trauma manifested for her was in the upper belly, in the solar plexus, in the will. And she had more fire and anger and resentment. And so she experienced her trauma, felt like rage or anger that showed up in her life and with her relationships. It was really so differently stored. And when we got into the trauma packets, their body memory was just completely different of how they assimilated that situation.
Yeah, and I think that really speaks to the uniqueness of how each of us stores differently in the body and how we absorb the trauma in the moment. And so a lot of the mental talk of what we think the trauma is or what we think is affecting us really ends up being quite different when we're exploring those trauma packets.
Later in life, the mental story that they created about the trauma was very different, and how it was stored was very different. So how someone doesn't really start to create the story about their trauma until they're maybe late teens or 20s. And that's also really fascinating, because we've had the experience of working with teens, and they don't really have a lot of story about their traumas, even if they've been through a big trauma. Like, their mental body hasn't really capitulated the experience the way a 20, 30, 40, 50, we've worked with together 80-year-olds that had trauma packets around a polio experience.
Kim, when you say that trauma is stored in the body. Can you speak to where is it stored and what are like the mechanics of you have an event and then can you walk us through like how does that happen? How does it work into our bodies and where are they?
To explain that, we first have to touch on this concept of the dimensions of consciousness and body consciousness versus spiritual consciousness versus mental consciousness. Bessel van der Kolk talks about how trauma is stored in the body and how the body keeps the score. And in inner alignment, we call that body consciousness the second dimension consciousness. So people around now have heard of 3D and 5D, and they think, oh, we have to move out of the third dimension and get into the fifth dimension, which is the spiritual dimension of consciousness. And if you follow Barbara Hand Clow's definition of the dimensions of consciousness, we actually have to be multidimensional. We need to have connection to all the dimensions of ourselves. We don't want to just be in the 5D in the spiritual consciousness because we have this physical body and we have to like be adulting in the body, right? An issue shows up typically in the fourth dimension consciousness. Like I have an issue with my spouse. I'm upset with him because every time I ask him to do something, he does it this other way. And we just never, he doesn't hear me. And I feel like, right. So that's a fourth dimensional issue. That's a current life issue that's playing out in the mind and between two sets of minds in this space of duality of who's right and wrong and what's the best and what's the worst. So that's what we would call the fourth dimension. So we notice there's an issue when in fourth dimension. And ideally, we're aware that the issue is actually starting probably in the trauma packet, which is in the second dimension. So the third dimension is the physical body. And what we'd say the second dimension is a deep feeling, somatic experience, like near the organs, near just beneath the skin, often very much felt from the neck down to the bottom of our torso. And that's that second dimension, that space in the feeling body is, I would say, where trauma gets stored.
It's interesting how this shows up, right? Because it's stored in the second dimension, and you'll often have clients that are coming in saying, well, I have anxious attachment, or I have this. They've done a lot of work in the mental body consciousness to know what's wrong with them, but they still can't shift out of that because it's still stored in the body and they haven't taken care to heal it in the body yet or to process it in the body yet.
People listen to podcasts and read books and they understand it from fourth dimension. Like they've rewired the way they should think, like I shouldn't feel victimized, or I shouldn't feel powerless, or I need to be in abundance mindset, right? Like they've rewired the way they should think, but their body is very much in that place of powerlessness or that 6-year-old memory of feeling like they don't matter or they shouldn't say what's on their mind.
Yeah. And again, the talk therapy that's beneficial because it helps the mental, that fourth dimension, right, wrong, good, bad, should, shouldn't layer, understand it, is often what somebody is trying to heal the trauma, to heal the patterns, to heal the anxiety and depression from. And while that's beneficial to understand and put those pieces together, it is, like you said, Kim, that somatic feeling that still is playing out and literally attracting things into their life from that place versus I know I shouldn't be doing this, but why do I keep playing out the same thing? Because their body is a magnet. It literally is an energetic magnet attracting from that somatic place in the body. So the whole thing is really fascinating. And I do love the study of the consciousness because it does help bring some more understanding to all the different levels of trauma.
Yeah, so it's in the second dimension, deep within the body, and the location of it in the body is going to track with what their issue is. So for example, in the low belly, we find a lot of abandonment trauma, and it feels like a heavy bowling ball, or it feels cold, and empty, or it feels crampy in the low belly. So there's actually a physical, and where the physical and energetic layers of the body meet, there's actual very typical sensation in those chakras or those spaces. In the upper belly is often like a deep sense of unworthiness, or I'm bad. And that unworthiness will feel like nausea or heat or like hot movement or knots in that mid belly or upper belly in the solar plexus, or anger can feel like that. And then the feeling of unloved, or that anxiety of feeling not cared for, can feel like pressure or squeezing in the heart or on top of the rib cage, or that feeling of like I don't matter, or like my truth can't come out, might feel like a lump or a squeezing in the neck. So there's very much of a sensation associated with the theme of what's happening for that person or for that child. And the trauma packet is stored in the second dimension in a space in the body. And there's very much sensation in the physical and energetic layers of the person, if once you go into that third and second dimension self.
And it can take some time for people to feel the sensations. I recall starting this program and have been practicing yoga for like 18 years and not being able to feel right away. So it can take some practice for clients to feel what's in their body, to feel the trauma packets and the sensation, but it's there. It's never not there.
Right. Yeah. So that would be, so as we start to look at the layers of the body now, so the trauma gets settled into a space in the body, and then every layer of the being is affected, is auto-associated. So neurons that fire together wire together. And so when we have these experiences on the physical, energetic, emotional, and mental layer of the body, it becomes like a ball of yarn that gets bound up and auto-associated and stored, and then it will reverberate into the present moment. So I just gave some examples of what the sensations, the energetic sensations, because they're not actual physical sensations, or maybe they are, we just can't measure them. But physically, on the physical body, people will hit a fear response, fight or flight response. Fight, flight, or freeze are typically those core experiences. So they'll hit a fight response where their body like goes into a fight, like angry thoughts or like standing up or needing to be right. So the physical body will hit the neurochemicals of fight or flight, fear, anxiety, or just a freeze response. Very much like animals in the wild, their nervous system will hit fight, flight, freeze when they hit a trauma as well. It's a very animal response from the animal brain.
Have you noticed, I have noticed this within myself, but I'm wondering if you've noticed this with other people, and I've noticed it with some clients as well, but there's different fear responses for different trauma packets. Like I might have a freeze response or a flight response for something, but then in other areas, I'll have a fight response.
And it's different for every person. And that kind of takes us into the complexity of the dosha, or the energetic constitution of the clients as well. So we have a sympathetic nervous system response that hits the physical body. And that's one of the layers that gets wired in. And then there's this energetic response that happens within one of the trauma packets. So for example, for one of the twins, she stored the trauma in her root chakra, really at the base of the body. And it's stored as a feeling of unsafe. So emotionally, she felt like she was unsafe. She didn't have the protection. Mentally, on the mental layer of the body, she felt like The world is not safe. I'm not spiritually safe. My emotions aren't safe. My thoughts aren't even safe. So safety really penetrated into every aspect of her life. Men aren't safe. Going to work doesn't feel safe. And so that's how it got stored. It's got stored on every layer as safety, whereas twin B stored it in her upper belly as really a fight response and needing to be right and needing to know. And if she knows, then she feels strong. So her experience was more of like a churning or a tightness in the upper belly. That was the main sensation of the trauma packet. And she, instead of a flight response, was in a fight response pretty much her whole life, needing to be right, needing to control things, needing to fight for what she wants because that's what feels better, and an entitlement around what she wants and how she wants it. So where one went into more of the weak flight response and that unsafe and helplessness, the other one went into an overpower response. And that showed up as thoughts of nobody does anything right and the world's not supporting me. And her thought process and her emotional internalization of the experience of only having mom now and not having dad there to protect her just really felt extremely different. And their worldview got set up so incredibly differently. So two people, same family, same experiences, was told at the same moment. And then the way that this created their life experience was just completely different. They had a whole different paradigm as they moved through life.
And I think having the privilege to work with twins that had that information at the same time gave us a lot of information and detail of how unique. So as a practitioner, never assuming I know that, oh, it must be this and it must show up in the body. It must be in the root chakra. And here's what we can do to work it. Like, we don't ever know. We just never know where it got stored, how it got wired in.
A top of mind question now, as I listen to all of this, is if everyone experiences trauma and trauma is stored as trauma packets in the body, how do these trauma packets that have not been attended to present in day-to-day living? Like, what are some of the symptoms and signatures that somebody would experience or exhibit that indicates, that's how trauma packets unattended act and present?
Yeah, so I can give a couple examples that might be useful. So there was somebody that I worked with who had a business, and it was in a building, and every day she came into work, she would walk past the building of the building manager who she paid rent to and whatnot. But she would avoid going past there because she was always afraid she was in trouble for something. Always afraid. So just avoiding any getting in trouble. She had wired in, I'm a bad person. And when going into the trauma packet, it was one of those experiences that was very benign. She was 4 years old and her mom had a gift wrapped under the bed, and she was a curious 4-year-old, unwrapped the gift. It was a bottle of lotion. I still remember this. It was a bottle of lotion. So she tried to wrap it back up and pretend like she didn't get into it. Well, her mom discovered the disheveled wrapped gift and kind of threw a fit saying, who did this? And she never admitted to it, but she held in her body from that moment. That's what came through, that she was a bad person and she was going to get in trouble. And so that pattern kept playing out in her adult life until we went into the trauma packet, and that's what had happened.
That's a great example. And I think what that does is characterizes sometimes people would be walking around with a set of emotions that don't match the current situation. Like, I feel like a bad person, but I'm just walking by a building, right? Like, so something like that, it's pretty obvious that this feeling doesn't match what I quote unquote should be feeling in the present moment, right? There's like, this must be old, or this, what is this? Or is this my trauma talking, right? So there's those experiences. And then there's experiences like we've had parents who are railing up against their kids, right? They're just like so triggered by their one kid who's always yelling or always doing the thing. And the parent actually believes that there's an issue with the kid, and they're really triggered in the moment and merged with the current life experiences so much that they think they have to fix the kid because the kid's the problem. But when we get into the trauma packet, really what we access is that this adult has trauma packets about feeling out of control and feeling overwhelmed and feeling like a bad person, right? Or feeling like they were never listened to. So it can be anything in the trauma packet, but it's being played out as if the kid is the problem, and that if we could just fix the kid, then I'll feel okay. But in truth, when you work the anxiety around the kid or the depression around being a parent, it's really rooted in an old experience in that parent. And so people will present in either way. Like, I have this big feeling that doesn't match the current situation, or I have a problem with this other person in my life, and I need to manage my anxiety or depression around it because it's really ruining my experience of life. So that's how it'll present. But then what happens after that trauma packet is formed is the years that follow will start to neurosynaptically wire that 8 or 10-year-old around that belief system. So to give the example that Misty just gave of the person that feels like they've done something wrong, then they'll start to filter life. The brain will start to filter life on, oh, what did I do wrong? And then there will be more data points of, oh, I did this wrong, or I'm wrong here, or I'm wrong there. And a whole belief system or habit of going through life will be formed around self-doubt and being a bad person, about doing things wrong. And that paradigm will build a life of its own. The brain will be wired up, always filtering and vigilant about being wrong or bad. The situations that person will attract into their life will affirm, oh, there's another place that I'm wrong. There's another place that I'm bad. And then a person's worldview or consciousness will be set up around that one or few trauma packets that really dictate. We get millions of bits of information at any moment, and how our brain is set up is how we'll filter that. So then we will create a worldview around that one tiny mad idea of that issue, of that trauma packet, and we'll set up our whole life. And then if you believe either in how the brain filters life or in the law of attraction or the law of resonance, we will then, from that base vibration of I'm bad and I'll do bad things, will attract more situations that will affirm that badness. And we will create essentially life stories and life experiences, because if I feel bad, then life will give me experiences of feeling bad or feeling wrong. And then through the law of resonance or through the law of attraction, that's what our life content will be. That's what our life and experience will show up as.
And I think that's what you start seeing. You start having somebody come to you and they're like, I don't belong at work, and I don't belong with my in-laws, and I don't belong with my partner. And you just start seeing it everywhere. So because we've had the experience of working with a trauma packet, it becomes like this beacon of like, I don't belong, and you're seeing it play out in the pattern. But the person has wired it in so heavily, and they've set up their whole life around it, that often it's hard for them to see it initially. And I think that speaks to the love container that we use to help them see the pattern, where they're attracting. Why is this continuing to show up in my life? I don't belong at my job. I don't belong in my family. And that really is usually when they they show up and they're like, something is vibrating within me and I don't know what it is. And I've talked about it for 20 years. So time to go into the trauma packet.
Yeah, it's like when that theme is just showing up everywhere and it becomes undeniable. And then they've done therapy, they've done those single layer modalities. They've done therapy, they've gone to Reiki, they had the acupuncture, they did the EMDR, like they did these things, but it's still there. And that's where people start to feel stuck and broken, is they start to become acutely aware of this theme or this blockage, and then they just don't know how to get to it, because often we're trying to get to it from the mind and from the intellectualization of the feeling. Like that's the fascinating thing. Like when we have emotional issues, we go to a therapist and then we go from the sensation of the emotion into the head and we talk about it and analyze it. So even there, we're not processing emotion in the space of a body. And sometimes we're somatically feeling it, and that's good to feel it, but that often doesn't make it change or go away per se.
I also wanted to add that it is interesting when one starts this work, because we are not intentionally looking back at their past to dig into like, well, tell me about when you were 5 and how your mom and dad did this or that. We're going into the vibration of what is replaying currently in the moment in the last few days. And then that current life vibration or pattern is what gives us access to where the trauma packet is. And the body is the thing that tells us what memory is there.
Yeah, it is a body focused. It presents through the body, and it's from the body. The body shows us where the work is, rather than a top down. It's almost like a bottom up approach to doing our healing, so that we're healing the trauma packets that are making the most noise in the present moment, rather than poking around looking for trauma packets. Because, at any point we have not like tons of trauma packets maybe. But in our work, we often say that if we can heal and work a few of those big boulders that are blocking the flow of the river. So if we can get to some of those really big issues, and that doesn't mean big T traumas. It could be a little T trauma that's a big boulder in the river. But if we can work a good handful of those, then once the prana, the life force, the true self, the soul nature gets back really tethered on board, those other rocks will kind of push to the side of the river through the flow of being so embodied in the present moment. So that's a really important piece of trauma packet work, because that kind of gets to well, what do you do about these trauma packets and how do you get rid of all of them? And I get to teach yoga teachers Ayurvedic psychology. And when I teach Ayurvedic psychology, everyone's like, oh my God, I have trauma packets. I got to get rid of these trauma packets. How do I fix the trauma packets? And we're always like, hold up, wait a minute. Don't go try to fix every trauma packet. The first step really is to build awareness and this is the 5th and 6th layer of the body. So we've talked about the physical, energetic, mental, and emotional layers of the body and how that really is formed in the trauma packet. But really what the work is when we talk about the soul retrieval process is bringing the awareness and the bliss layer of the body on board within the trauma packet, bringing those upper dimensionals to seep into the lower dimensional experience of trauma. And so the first step, and what I hope this episode brings, is just a level of awareness that, there is stored trauma and it is reverberating into the present moment. And there's themes of I'm safe, or I'm abandoned, or I don't belong, or I'm not worthy, or I'm not loved, or people don't care about me, or I don't matter, or I'm not seen or heard, or like I don't have truths, or my truths don't matter, right? So we have these themes that are playing out in our lives. And the work is to first be able to see, maybe that's not true. Maybe that's old. Maybe I do matter. I just feel like I don't matter because there's an old trauma packet kicking up dirt into the present moment. And that space, or the ability to, if the trauma packet is me on stage feeling unworthy, the ability to get into the audience and be able to know thyself beyond that loud vibration that's been telling us who we are and how much we don't matter. And if we look at the soul, or the bliss layer of the body, being an expansive part of ourselves, like 99.9% of who we are, then that 0.01% of the consciousness that's in the mind, in the physical layer of the body, is just a tiny fraction of the truth of who and what we are. And the awareness layer of the body gives us the ability to pan out and to feel who we are, not to just know conceptually, I'm more than this little reaction, but to actually feel the expansiveness of the love that we are, the beauty that we are, the value that we are, the how much we matter, and how it's our birthright to feel and be the love, right? That 99% of us that is the divine aspect. And the awareness of the fact that my small mind is telling me I don't matter, or I'm not worthy, or I'm not enough. And maybe that's probably not true. And maybe there's so much more. And maybe that's kind of ridiculous and funny. And even though it feels really loud and it feels like 100% truth in the moment, that's starting to build that awareness and the ability to feel the unworthiness without merging our consciousness into the small mind beliefs that we are, in fact, unworthy.
And to know that I'm not alone, like everybody has it. So it's not just the broken problem child over there, or the broken home, and it was just me and I'm alone in this, that we all have some level of trauma, all of us. And that's oneness and consciousness.
All right, friends. Well, we'll leave it at this cliffhanger. This was, what an incredible dynamic conversation. Thank you. I thank all three of you for your first and foremost, your commitments to yourself in your own healing journeys, for going through this process for yourselves. And then with such vast open hearts, your devotion and dedication to helping others to become free of unnecessary suffering through the inner alignment process. So thank you all so much. And
yeah, thank you, Daniela. Thank
we'll
you.
be back for episode 3.
Yeah. Thank you to Laura and to
you.
Misty as well for lending your experience and your insight and your expertise. What a gift to be with you and Daniela. Many blessings, friends. Namaste. Thanks for tuning in to today's Inner Alignment podcast. If you're ready to dive deeper into your anxiety or depression healing process, learn more about our 2-month Inner Alignment healing program. The healing program addresses trauma on all 6 layers of the body, and the program has been successful for over 400 participants. If you're feeling ready to join the community of healers who provide this sacred and profound healing work in the world, maybe it's time to become an inner alignment practitioner. If you think this is your dharma or your life purpose, be in touch. Find out more at KimberlyBeekman.com.